California regulates everything. And yet, 150 miles east of San Diego, in one of the harshest deserts in the United States, sits a community with no mayor, no government, and no city services. The state owns the land. So why hasn't California shut it down? Because Slab City isn't surviving in spite of geography. It's surviving because of it. The story begins with a military base that no longer exists, a patch of desert that few people wanted, and a problem governments have faced throughout history. What do you do with a place that costs more to control than it seems worth? At first glance, Slab City barely looks real. There are RVs parked in the desert, improvised homes built from scrap materials, and art installations rising out of the sand, most famously East Jesus. An outdoor music venue called The Range hosts performances beneath the open sky. Nearby, Salvation Mountain turns a barren hillside into one of the most recognizable landmarks in Southern California. Scattered across the landscape are the concrete foundations that gave the settlement its name, the Slabs. Those foundations are the remains of Camp Dunlap, a Marine Corps training base built during World War II. When the military left after the war, most of the base was dismantled and hauled away. The foundations stayed behind. Over time, people began moving in. Some came looking for cheap winters or an off-grid lifestyle. Others wanted freedom from rules that they felt were suffocating, and some simply had nowhere else to go. Today, the permanent population is usually measured in the hundreds. During the cooler winter months, that number can rise into the thousands as seasonal residents arrive from across the United States. All of this exists on roughly 640 acres, about 1 square mile. Not a city in the conventional sense, but large enough to support a community with its own landmarks, routines, and identity. And that's what makes Slab City so interesting. Most places like this disappear. This one didn't. If you look at a map, Slab City sits in Imperial County near the Salton Sea, in one of the hottest inhabited regions of the United States. Summer temperatures regularly climb above 110 degrees. Rainfall is scarce and water is limited. For most of modern history, very few people have looked at this landscape and thought it was the ideal place to build a town. The easy explanation is that nobody wanted the land. There is some truth to that. But plenty of places in America have low-value land. Most of them never become settlements like Slab City. What made this place different was the combination of geography and history. The desert kept development pressure low. At the same time, the military had already solved some of the practical problems that usually prevent people from settling in remote areas. Roads existed, access existed, the site had already been cleared. The geography made the land undesirable. The abandoned base made it usable. That combination matters because people rarely move into completely empty wilderness. They settle where geography creates an opportunity and history leaves behind an opening. Slab City happened to have both. Of course, living in a place like Slab City has always depended on something else: mobility. For most of history, choosing a more remote lifestyle meant giving something up. Reliable power, communication, access to work. The farther you moved from major population centers, the harder those things became. That's why I wanted to feature remote vans here. What I find interesting about companies like Remote Vans isn't just the vehicle itself. It's how technology is changing the geography of daily life. Their premium adventure vans are built around power, connectivity, and 4-season travel, making it possible to work, communicate, and live comfortably from places that would have been far more difficult just a generation ago. In a lot of ways, that's the same trade-off we've been talking about throughout this video. People have always been drawn to places that offer a little more freedom and a little more distance. The difference is that modern technology lets you keep much more of the convenience. If you'd like to learn more about remote vans, I'll leave a link in the description. Now, even with all of that technology, there are still limits. Because geography only explains why people arrived. It doesn't explain why they're still there. The strange thing about Slab City isn't that people moved into the desert. People have been doing that for centuries. The strange thing is that they're still there. After all, this isn't some forgotten frontier outpost. Slab City sits in California, one of the most heavily governed states in America. The government has the legal authority to clear the settlement if it chooses to. So why hasn't it? Because authority and incentives are not the same thing. Every government operates with finite resources. Decisions get made constantly about which problems deserve attention now and which ones can wait. And geography has a way of shaping those decisions. Imperial County is enormous. It covers more than 4,000 square miles of southeastern California, larger than some states, with extreme heat and some of the driest conditions in the country. The same conditions that discourage large-scale settlement also discourage large-scale investment. That matters. Governments tend to focus where the stakes are highest. Growing populations demand services. Valuable land attracts developers. Economic activity creates pressure for roads, utilities, and infrastructure. Slab City sits far from the center of those priorities. The state could remove residents, but that would cost money and create a problem that few voters are demanding it solve. It could redevelop the area, but that would require someone willing to invest in one of the harshest environments in California. Or it could leave the settlement largely alone. For decades, that has often been the easiest option. Slab City isn't hidden. It simply occupies a place where the incentives to intervene have remained relatively weak. And that actually raises a question I'll get to in a minute, because those incentives can change. And when they do, everything about Slab City's future changes with them. The people who move here are all looking for different things, but the desert is giving them the same thing: distance. People have always moved to the edges: the Appalachian hollers, the desert southwest, the bayous of Louisiana. Not because they loved the terrain, but because the terrain meant nobody was coming after them. The people who live in Slab City often get the attention: the artists, retirees, and seasonal RV residents. These are people trying to live outside the systems most Americans depend on. But those groups aren't all looking for the same thing. Some are chasing lower costs. Some are looking for independence. Some simply want a place where they can be left alone. What connects them isn't ideology, it's geography. Throughout history, places at the edge of government systems have attracted people looking for more autonomy. Sometimes those places were mountains. Sometimes they were forests, deserts, islands, or distant frontiers. The details changed, but the pattern didn't. Distance has always created room for alternatives. Not complete freedom, not independence from the state, just a little more space between people and the institutions that govern everyday life. And that's part of what Slab City represents. The settlement survives because it occupies a place where that distance still exists. It's close enough to civilization to remain habitable, yet far enough from major economic and political centers that the pressures reshaping most communities arrive much more slowly. That combination is rare, especially in California. After all, most of California's landscape has become more valuable over time. Growing cities, expanding infrastructure, and rising land prices have steadily pulled more places into the orbit of the state's economic engine. Slab City largely escaped that process, at least so far. And that raises one final question. If California has the authority to remove the settlement, and if land use patterns can change dramatically over time, what's stopping all of this from disappearing tomorrow? California absolutely has the power to intervene in Slab City. This is not sovereign territory. Despite the many clickbait titles of videos about the area, this place doesn't exist outside American law. State agencies can enter the area, and law enforcement can operate there. If Sacramento decided that removing the settlement was a top priority, the state has tools available to make that happen. So, does that invalidate everything we've talked about? Not at all. Because the question was never whether California could remove Slab City. The question is why it hasn't. And those are very different questions. Geography doesn't eliminate choices. It changes incentives. Throughout this video, we've looked at a piece of desert land with limited water, extreme temperatures, and relatively little economic value. Those conditions don't make government action impossible. They simply reduce the urgency. A very different geography would create very different pressures. Imagine this same settlement sitting on valuable coastal property outside Los Angeles, or near a rapidly growing suburb, or on land needed for a major infrastructure project. The outcome would probably look very different, because the moment land becomes valuable, more people begin competing over how it should be used. Developers see opportunity, governments see tax revenue. Residents begin demanding services, and political pressure quickly follows. Slab City has avoided much of that pressure because the geography around it has remained largely unchanged. That doesn't mean it will stay that way forever. Development arrives after valuable resources are discovered. That's why populations grow in places that once felt remote. And when that happens, communities that used to exist comfortably on the margins often find themselves at the center of somebody else's plans. Slab City could face the same future. The settlement exists today because the incentives that created it still exist. If those incentives change, the settlement may change with them. And that brings us back to where we started. California has a reputation for rules. The kind of place where government feels present in almost every part of daily life. The story of Slab City isn't a story about government disappearing. California never lost the authority to govern this place. The story is about incentives. A former military base left behind usable land. The surrounding desert kept development pressure low. Decade after decade, the cost of changing the situation remained higher than the benefits of doing so. So, the settlement endured. What makes Slab City interesting isn't that it exists outside the system. It's that the system has largely decided it has more important things to do. And that's a lesson that extends far beyond 1 square mile of desert in Southern California. Because the same geography that allows places like Slab City to exist can also make them disappear once the incentives change. California didn't forget about Slab City. The desert made it easy to leave alone. The world has a structure. Let's keep finding it.